All right. So I'm Carl Kesselman. If you don't know, I'm a professor. What's that? Okay, Steve would like to say something else.
My apologies. But we got 10 minutes, so I can tell jokes. We have two new members of the scientific leadership group here who I forgot, even though I had the piece of paper in front of me, forgot I don't have my glasses on, so I couldn't see the piece of paper. We have two new members of the scientific leadership group, and I'm very grateful that they're here. The first is Phil Soriano, who many of the biologists already know. Phil, among the many hats he wears, is professor of developmental biology and regenerative biology at Mount Sinai, works on PDGF and FGF factors. Phil's generously agreed not only to be on the SLG, but to give a talk. And the other is Ray Winslow, who is at Johns Hopkins University. He's the PI of the Cardiovascular Research Grid and director of the Institute for Computational Medicine, director of the Center for Cardiovascular Bioinformatics and Modeling. So I'd like to thank both of them for taking the opportunity to subject themselves to airlines and come out here and give us their feelings about FaceBase. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Okay, well, then I'll have to just talk especially fast. So, all right. So, as I was saying, I'm Carl Kesselman. I'm the PI of the Hub. I'm faculty in the School of Engineering at the University of Southern California, for those of you who haven't been subjected to me prior to this. We're going to spend the next hour. I'm going to give you an update of what we've done over the past year with the Hub, and hopefully you'll agree it's been a pretty active year, give you an idea of what's coming down the pike in the next 12 months. Some of the stuff we'll talk about will be much sooner than 12 months. And we've got an hour for this, so you've got two choices. You can either listen to me drone on for an hour, or you can ask questions and make comments and so on. So that's the plan for the next hour. Before I dive in, we've got a pretty good representation here, which is the top of the iceberg. But just so everyone knows, we have Chris Williams, who you've all interacted with. She's been responsible for a lot of the user interface design, for all the user-facing stuff, for doing a lot of coordination, and she's been driving our user-centered testing and evaluation process as well, which we'll talk a little bit about. See, we have Alejandro Bugakov, who is the data wizard, and hopefully at this point I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. So he's been doing all the data integration and data ingest work. We have Rob Schuler, who is doing overall coordination, system architecture, and cat herding. Let's see, we have Kyle Chard from the University of Chicago, who's been doing a bunch of the user tools and kind of back-end stuff. We have, who have I forgotten? Did I get everyone? I think that's it. Hopefully I didn't forget any. Oh, and then we have the people from Yang's group. Bridget has been doing a lot of work on the kind of the biological connections. Seth Ruffins on also some of the biology and imaging. And then we have a new ex officio member who you'll hear from, Melissa Handel, who's working with us from the Monarch project on some of the ontology work and extending the connections of FaceBase data to other data sets outside of FaceBase. Did I miss anyone? So those are the people who are I'm just like the Oz guy here, and these are the people actually doing all the actual work. So with that, let's get forward in a review of what's been going on with the Hub. So, as Steve alluded to, the Hub is really the point where the data being produced by the consortium actually meets the community and hopefully derives value. So we spent a lot of time over the past 12 months really thinking about how do we take all of this data that is either existing within the FaceBase produced by the first phase and all of the new data and maximizing the utility of that data to the community. And so, and we've been taking a fairly broad view of that, where it's not, obviously we're all technologists and we like technology, but we've been taking a fairly broad view about usability, and that it's not just technology, it's not just user interface, it's data organization, it's data quality, it's how it's presented, it's trying to understand what people are going to do with it and facilitate and streamline that use. So we've been really taking kind of an outside-in approach with everything that we've done, focused on, a little bit like Amazon. How do we drive customers to the site? How do they get them to get value from the site? And then what's the metric for success here? Initially, our metric has been focused on downloads. We're starting to take a fairly a broader view of what it means to use FaceBase, kind of looking more at not just downloads, but what pages people visit and whether there's knowledge and information extracted just by interaction with the site itself rather than downloading a data set. So we've been spending a lot of time thinking about these issues. So the high-level things that we've done over the last 12 years is we've been, I would argue, and I'd be interested to get your opinion, that we've been pretty successful in acquiring and publishing new data. We have streamlined the new curation process. It's a little more low-tech than we initially had anticipated, in that we're using kind of spreadsheets and uploads. So far, that seems to be working pretty well. Alejandro is, I believe, staying on top of everything. I believe we're getting the data in place and that it's of suitable quality. We had initially planned, and probably will still do, a more streamlined, automated, self-curated upload process, but right now that doesn't seem to be a gating factor to getting data in and available to the site. We've actually spent a significant amount of time this year improving the quality of the existing data. We've gone and spent a lot of time correcting errors. We've gone back and recurated a bunch of data. We'll talk about that briefly. We've added new terminology. We've unified the terminology. We've done a lot of work in reorganizing it to make it more discoverable and more consistent when you find it. So we've actually done a fair amount of work with that. We've spent a lot of time on usability and making the site more attractive, more intuitive, making it easier to get to the data that you want, understanding what people want to do with that site, with the data. Many of you have been called upon to be part of our beta testing cycle, and we appreciate your input and we'll continue to solicit that input. We put in place a attempted to mimic a best industry practice around building functional, interactive websites and ways of presenting data. So we're following what's called a user-centered design or user testing-based design methodology, where we do rapid iterations and actually do usability studies. I know many of you have participated in these things where we've given you wireframes and mock-ups and asked you, what does this mean? How well, can you figure out what to do next? Can you find things? We're going to continue that process, and we think that has resulted in some pretty significant improvements in where we started a year ago. I guess when we first put the new site up was like last August, right? Last July. So it's almost a year ago, and we've been through 3 iterations on the... Right, and we're working on our 3rd iteration of the homepage, kind of based on experience and feeding that back around, and we'll have some stuff to show you and get feedback on kind of the new entry point. So we've done a lot of work on that, and again, kind of with strong interaction with the community and using you as a representatives of the community. And then lastly, as I mentioned, we're identifying ways to make the data as useful as possible. And as Yang mentioned, we're approaching that from 2 levels. One level is how do we make your individual data sets as useful as possible? So how can we really make sure that they're discoverable, that they're well organized, that they're properly characterized, that you can find them? But then more importantly, what we feel is that our biggest bang for the buck is when we are able to take subsets of the data from the spoke and figure out connections between them so that then in aggregate they become useful. We believe that makes FaceSpace as a curated data repository going to be more powerful. And that's part of the exercise we're going to go through tomorrow in the breakout groups is is looking at ways we can come up with cross-cutting questions and connections between the data sets so that rather than having the hub be basically a repository for n different independent spokes, be a repository for a fully integrated craniofacial data collection. So that's the last thing that we're doing. So we've been spending a lot of time looking at, how do we drive up the value of the data holistically to the community and the utility of that. And so that's been another big thrust of what we spend our time on. All right, data updates. So as I had mentioned, over the past year, we've had a series of meetings with the informatics working group and people who've been participating in that. Thank you very much. When I talk to people in other consortium, I speak to the brilliance of Steve putting in the request for the informatics people in each of the spokes. I think that's worked out actually pretty well. We've had a long series of meetings led by Alejandro and Rob, help develop the ingest methods, help get convergence on shared vocabulary and terminology. And I think we've been pretty successful in getting new data into the system without long lags between submission and availability. So just some points here. So these weekly meetings with the informatics working groups, I think, again, have worked out pretty well. That's a nice mechanism. We did go through an exercise where we converged and agreed on a core set of terms, initially around, primarily around anatomical features, and I think that worked out pretty well. We brought in Jim Brinkley's group in OCDM and developing and coming up with those core set of terms. We then actually built a pretty lowbrow mechanism, but we built spreadsheets that only allowed you to use those terms. Pretty basic mechanism, but that's how we got all of our data, and so now we have consistency there. And then the data came in. It was posted for reviews by each spoke. We did a pass where we corrected errors and then pushed it out for general use. So overall, our perspective is that process has worked pretty well. We've got another tranche of data that Alejandro either has up or will be up momentarily with kind of the second wave of data coming in. I think hopefully this process has removed what I understand was a pain point in kind of getting curated data into the system in an expedient way. So hopefully you're not finding the lags to be painful. We've been focusing on data quality, and I think we're seeing that the quality is pretty good, which makes stuff more discoverable from the beginning. We want to do more work on curation, increase the resolution of the types of things we can search on going forward. But overall, my take and our take is that the ingest process is working pretty well, and all of the data sets that we've received are now available and searchable alongside of all the existing data. So, and here's just a brief list if there's any questions of what we've seen. So these are the current uploads. I'll just leave that up for a minute so you can see your name in lights. Alejandro is we've got a bunch of this now zebrafish stuff coming in, and we're very close on having this available, right? Yeah. So, okay, right. Right, so in case you didn't hear that, so these data sets are currently sitting on the staging server ready to be approved for release. And then we have, one of the other things we've done is we've done a lot of work on our software engineering process so we can push out updates and software updates and data updates pretty rapidly and pretty aggressively. So we have a very nice development procedure and beta servers and things like that we've built out over the last year. All right, so that's where we are with the data uploads. The real work in front of us, and actually, as I had mentioned, we spent a fair amount of time working on over the past year, has been in metadata characterization. So what we found is that in the data that we had, there was actually quite a bit of information about the individual data sets. However, a lot of it was found in kind of free text fields and experimental descriptions and descriptive fields. which made discovery of those data elements in any kind of granular way quite difficult. And so this became clear as we were building in these kind of higher resolution faceting mechanisms, which you see in the website, and then you'd see kind of what values were available through the facets and how many data sets were available through the facets. And we had many conversations where people would say, well, that data's there. And then we would say, but you can't find it. And then they would say, but that data's there. And then we would say, but you can't find it. And so we spent a lot of time trying to make it so the data was not only there, but findable. So that involved a number of things. So one of the earlier things we did in the year was we added a new element, which is an experiment type attribute. So now you can search on experiment types. I think it's, in some sense, it's quite trivial, but I think it's a really nice example of the process working correctly. We went through, we looked at all the types of experiments that people were doing across the spokes. We, as part of the informatics group, we converged on a set of experiment types. We then went back to standard established ontologies, this thing called OBO. We found the ontological terms that refer to experiment types. We discovered we were running experiments for which there's no standard term. We made up an intermediate value. We went back to the standards group, Paul Thomas in the hub, went back. We put in a proposal to add a new term. We got a new term assigned. So now we've actually, FaceBase has influenced the standard set of experimental names through this process. So I think, it's a small thing, but I think it's quite nice that we have, through FaceBase, influenced the standard descriptive experimental terms that are now used by the broader community. And now that's how you can find your data. I'll show you an example of that shortly. We also, surprisingly, had to do some work adding phenotypes. It turned out that we didn't have kind of granular descriptive phenotype in any of the data, or maybe there was like one term that was being used. So we've gone back and we've recurated all of the appropriate, and then much of the data is for wild type, so there's not really much phenotype there. But we've gone back and where appropriate, we've curated the data to include phenotype information, also from standard vocabulary. And then the work with Melissa Hendel going forward is going to really enrich that quite a bit. So the idea on actually being able to search and organize around specific phenotype, and then that gives you the handle to connect that to the gene expression data and so on and so forth. So that was kind of a missing piece that we've started to fill in. And now you can search on phenotype, and you can see what's there. And then we just did a lot of cleanup. So there was just gratuitous inconsistency. There was lack of use of standard terminology. There was just stuff that was wrong. And so we've gone through and we've invested time and effort in cleaning up the existing data and then learning from that to make sure the new data, we don't repeat those mistakes. And I think what we found is, again, even with the very simple ingest process we're using, I'd like to believe that the data that's coming in is of generally higher quality and annotated in a more granular fashion, so it's got a better discoverability kind of from day one. So that's the metadata. So along these lines, one of the reasons why we're doing all this metadata curation is, again, we want to start to make the data set be more, the FaceBase data sets look more, be more relevant holistically rather than a spoke at a time. And so one of the ways to do this is to start to exploit natural connections between the data and linkages between the data. In order to do that, we need to have better, more accurate, higher resolution descriptions of the data. And so with this focus on curating and increasing the types of things we're tracking through the metadata model, we're in a position now to start doing better linkages between the data sets and doing different cross cuts across the data sets rather than find a data set and access the whole thing. So we're starting to move down that path. So now we have things like the gene summary pages, which hopefully you've seen. That was a recent addition. and linkages on those two data set records. And as I implied, our big push over the next couple of months is going to be taking where these linkages do exist from the increased, from the more granular metadata model we have for all these elements, and really giving you a much more kind of hyperlinked web-like experience with that. We've been experimenting with some of these ideas in another project. They seem to work really well, allowing you to kind of pop from one view to another view very seamlessly. And so I think that should really significantly enhance the user experience and hopefully the utility of the FaceBase data. Again, what we're really shooting for is not have people find that one big lump of data that the individual spoke contributed, but rather look at formulating their own kind of crosscuts of the data and getting access to that. And I think we're very close to being able to do that. And the exercise tomorrow is, again, to look at those natural linkages across the projects and figure out how that will influence the way we're going to present the information to the end users so that they can really find collections across the entire data set that are useful. We've also done a fair amount of work in automating the process for ingesting the human subject data. So we've taken some of this in, but particular, and I think Rich is probably still sleeping or still in an airplane or something like that. Ophir's here. Yeah, so we've been spending a lot of time talking with the group here to automate the ingest of the human subjects data that they've acquired. And this is mostly a technology issue, but looking at how we can streamline moving data from the secure servers here into the segregated storage facility we have at USC for managing human subjects, and then also getting the amount of the parts of the data that can be publicly observed, so this, the searchable parts, the metadata, into the shared metadata catalog. So basically, we can have a seamless experience where you identify data sets, and then you get to the point where you discover they're human subjects. So go into the established human subject release process, which also seems to be working reasonably well at this point. So we have had requests for human subject data and released it appropriately. So that's ongoing. So that's kind of the metadata story. So site enhancements, we've spent a lot of time thinking about how to make the site more usable, more intuitive, more accessible, just basic kind of human factors, interaction stuff. And I think we've made some pretty good progress over the last 12 months. Yang stole my thunder a little bit by showing you the mouse matrix, but so you'll be subjected to the mouse matrix again. I mean, the mouse matrix actually turned out to be a really interesting exercise where we were having a meeting. Actually, it was Yang's idea, I think, so he can steal the thunder. So, this idea that we had this very nice faceted browser, but it was often a little bit too much work to come in and figure out, well, what is it that I want to search for? So we had the idea that, well, there's really, at least for mouse data, kind of 2 or 3 attributes that people really care about when they come in. One is the developmental stage. The other is the anatomical region. Could we provide a fast way for just getting to data associated with particular developmental stage and anatomical region? And so the idea was to present it as a matrix. We prototyped that out. We went through our user design process. We actually did a wireframe. We beta tested that. I think a number of you actually participated in that beta testing cycle. We then developed out an initial version, which was deployed maybe 6 months ago. Yeah, so that people seem to really like, and now we're in the process of generalizing that so we can look at other types of data. But the idea here is to take, this complex, it's actually a fairly complex data set with lots of attributes and dimensions, boiling it down to 2 or 3 core dimensions or attributes, which is going to be age, stage, experiment type, and and anatomical region, and allow people to very rapidly find things and then kind of guide you into the more general purpose search mechanism. So here's the picture. Hopefully all of you have seen it. So around on the rows, we've got developmental stage. On the columns, we've got the anatomical regions, which, by the way, these are all pulled from the standard anatomical vocabulary that we've now asserted against all of the data, all of the new data, because it's OCDM compliant coming in, not an issue. We went back and recurated the old data. And then here we've got the experiment types, and this includes the new ontological term that we created there. So this is, turns out to be a very powerful idea. Let's see, is this going to work? All right, so here you can see basically one dimension here. Here's our development stage. Here's our anatomical feature. And you can see here's the intersection, where we can see we've got three experiment types for mandibular process at E11.5. We can pull up, now these are the experiments that are available, and then we can pull up that specific thing. So here's kind of what I think is kind of the cool thing here as well. We identified just one experiment, so we can see that this is it, and we can drill down and look at the actual data that's associated with that particular experiment. And if we want to download it, we could download it. But the other thing, which I think is quite nice here, is that we could now go back and re-edit. We've got a starting point and said, well, you know what, there's also some other 8 stages that are for RNA expression for the mandibular process. So I'd like to see what those are as well. So we've just now kind of edited the terms and added in 10.5 there as well. So this is just a very simple, easy way to get to constructing somewhat complicated searches and getting there very rapidly. And so we think that goes a long way towards increasing usability. Let's see. So let me get back to the presentation. So we did that. All right. Well, here's the other thing that we've done is then kind of based on, where's my mouse? Now I can't find the mouse at all. There it is. The other thing we've done is, because of the way that we've gone about building the sites using kind of standard web technologies, we can bookmark sites just like you can bookmark any website you visit when you're crawling around the web doing shopping. There's a permalink, that little scroll bar-y thing. That little scrolly thing in the upper corner is a permalink, which you see in many, many websites you might visit. So the idea is you click that and it generates a bookmark that then you can share or save in your stack or do whatever you do with bookmarks. But we've also used that to give you entry shortcuts into the data. So as part of what we've done, we've also then identified some standard use cases. And as you've hopefully seen in your extensive interactions with the sites, organized a set of standard, fast, single-click entry points into the data collection here by organism, by data type, genetics data type, or imaging modality. So as hopefully you've seen, if you click on one of these, again, it throws you into the data browser with all the right filters set so that you can see just the data sets that correspond to that. And then just like I showed you with the mouse matrix, if you decide, I really wanted to add this or get rid of this or close it down a little bit more or look at this data but by a certain investigator, you have the ability to then go in and modify those searches. So I'm not sure if there's a need to show you that. And then we had an initial revision, I think. So this is at least the second version of these bookmarks, permalinks. These are really, really easy for us to do. So if you have ideas about shortcuts that would make sense to specific use cases or your users or who you think your users are going to be, if you let us know, it's really easy to create these. The real challenge is then how to organize the bookmarks on the home page or the subsequent pages so people can find the bookmarks. So we've been spending a fair amount of time thinking about how to organize the home page so people can see the bookmarks to get to the data. And as you'll see either today or tomorrow, we've got another crank on the home page that's hopefully kind of reorganizes that initial set of bookmarks and makes it a little more clear to people. So, right, and as I had mentioned, we're continuing to refine. Nothing is static here. We're continuing to refine and develop the home page. We're continuing to work on the matrix presentation, generalizing it so we can take other axes through the data, not just anatomy and age stage, developmental stage. So you could pick kind of 3 axes and use a similar kind of display. So you could imagine maybe using gene and phenotype as 2 axes. So looking at that, continue to do usability testing to make sure we produce things that are beautiful, attractive, and usable. As we've said in our various steering committee calls, we have kind of geared up our process and tooling to basically do some level of update on the site on a monthly basis. So our goal is to have something new and different out at least every month. And we've been pretty good about achieving those, more or less, release cycles. So that's kind of what we're set up to do there. Moving on. Okay, so here is the proposed next iteration on the home page. So this is the first that you'll get to see this. I mean, Chris, do you want to just maybe tell people what they should be looking for and the motivation here?
Sure. So we're basically trying to clean things up and direct people more easily to what they might be interested, and kind of basically split things up along organism lines for right now. So we've collated the mouse-specific info, human, zebrafish, and this layout kind of lets us be a little bit more flexible. So as we get new types of data, we can easily reconfigure this to adapt to that. As when we get more cross-cutting things, we can add a category for that as well. But we have the data browser shortcuts. I'm still personally figuring out if buttons are better or links, but we're focusing on the permalinks that go straight into the data browser, which are those links under data browser shortcuts, and then other related resources. Gene expression patterns, by the way, is the gene summary pages, which we now have, where available, we have links from those directly into the data as well for the related genes. And that's about it. So, and definitely towards the top, we're emphasizing the direct, like there's a data browser, and then we have a new video tutorial, which we're going to showcase to you soon as well. And then a little link to sign up to download data sets. So we're hoping that this will be a little bit clearer. I've done some user testing on this, not on this particular, I've done user testing that has led me to this design. So the next step is I'll be pulling in a few of you to test this. So the process continues.
Right, so we're going to finish the design work on this, and then, I mean, the plan is to roll out the improved homepage probably in the next couple of weeks, I would say. More? Okay, we have to test it. All right, maybe not the next couple of weeks. Where a couple could be 4 to 6. Yeah, so this is on our path, and then I'll get to this. Shortly, the other thing we've done is we've put in kind of the standard best practice industry analytics on these things as well. So we'll start to be able to measure kind of from a Amazon, Google kind of perspective what people are clicking and what they're doing, so we can focus on organizing this to make it the most useful and intuitive interaction that you could imagine. Anyway, so that's what's going on with the home page. There's another thing which, fortunately or unfortunately, we spent a lot of time on. I'm not going to dwell on all the nitty-gritty details, but we have the idea of identifying users and logging in has always been kind of a requirement from day one for FaceSpace, particularly for tracking purposes. So there was a strong requirement that we knew who was doing what. We also, did have in our proposal, and it's still on our roadmap to do personalization. We think that's important. So understand saving searches, sharing things. So understanding who your users are is important. And then also we still have self-curation and auto-upload of data sets on the roadmap. Again, that hasn't turned out to be a real sticky point right now, but we'd still like to do that. And again, that requires understanding who you are and what your roles are. So we've completely revamped and modernized the authentication service. So the way you used to log on used to be we maintained a database of users and passwords. And basically we switched over for some new technology based on something called OAuth, which you don't need to know about other than it's what everyone uses. It's what Google uses. And then the other important thing about the approach that we've taken is that there is a connection to your campus ID or authenticity ID providers on your campus. So what this means is that people on your campus can use their campus user passwords and logins. They will. It's not up right now. But the reason for doing this is I can now log on to on the site you can't get to yet, but soon you will be able to, using my USC credentials, including the two-factor authentication that we have to have at USC and so on. So it means that rather than now having to go through a procedure where you have to ask for an account and we give you an account and then you have to tell us what your username is and we have to make up a password and all that, you can just basically use your campus credentials. So we think that will lower the barrier to entry to using this. It'll make it easier. You could even use your Google account to log in now. And so, and then we have a very nice way of controlling who can do what based on the various ways that they log in. So this is a little bit of inside baseball, but we think it will make the site easier for people to use, lower the barrier to entry, and allow us to do personalization and allow us to do the self-curation for the data providers in a more effective way. So, so you can look for that coming out in the next. It's all ready to go. It's just hasn't been pushed out. At this point, it hasn't been pushed out to the production site yet. And again, the win here is no. You don't have to remember a new user account and password. Yes.
Okay, so the concern was that if you're logging in with your campus account, that if FaceSpace were hacked, would that compromise your university credentials? And the answer is no. It has to do with this open authorization protocol. So what actually happens is that when you log into one of these sites, and this is common across other web applications that you might use across the web, when you go through this process, it bounces you over to your campus, you log in there. That system then says FaceSpace is allowed to or that you've logged in successfully through that other provider. We're only given like a little token that is not linked to your. Well, it's just it's kind of a ticket that says it's been approved, but we don't ever get any of your confidential information.
So it's similar. It's exactly the experience you get with all the same risks and trade-offs when you go to another campus, use EduRoam to log into the wireless, which I notice we can't do here. But if you were to go to a EduRoam campus and then it would say, oh, I want to log into the wireless and use EduRoam, and then you would log in using your local university credentials. The campus you're visiting never sees that. So it's exactly analogous to that. Does that answer your question? Sounds like, well, we could, if you've got further questions, we could do that offline. But this is really standard practice, and we're doing it at actually fairly rigorous. We have a dedicated security person who you don't see. She's part of the iceberg that's not here, but there's a fair amount of due diligence that's been done on this to make sure this represents kind of best practice around these. Yeah, Pedro. Yeah, so this is a good question. The question is, if you have access to both Google and university accounts, what would you recommend? I mean, I'll tell you, I prefer my university account because it's got two-factor authentication on it, and so it it kind of just works. It's associated with all my university credentials, and I get asked for approval on my cell phone every time I log in. So, it's 6 done. I think. I mean, Kyle or Rob might have opinions. I'm not sure it really matters. To minimize your confusion, it'd be better to pick one. Although you actually could go back and forth. You could use either, but then that gets you into having to associate the two together. But the idea is if you want to come in and using Google as the standard way, you can do that. If you want to use your university credentials, you can do that. The main selling point here is that you don't have to get something new. You just use something that you've already got, and you can pick whichever you really feel like you'd like to use. Steve.
Carl, for the squeamish in the audience, can they still just have a FaceBase account?
Yes.
They're all FaceBase.
But they can still have a specific FaceBase login.
If you want to, yeah, absolutely. You can do it whichever way you want. And still, even with the sign-up process, if you're using an existing ID, there will still be like one screen where you have to go, I belong to this institution, I'm part of this project, so that we kind of know what your connection is.
Yeah, a lot of interest over this login stuff.
So just one more question. The new.
No, speak closer.
Okay, so the new FaceSpace is just so much better than the previous incarnation of the website. But for people who are not member of FaceSpace and who would want to use just the information which is there to try to get information, they probably just don't need to log in and just at least try to get the information. That was a big problem about the initial FaceSpace website, because you had to log in to be able to access the data.
I'm not sure that was true.
Yes, that was true.
Was it true?
I want to know if you download.
So to download, you have to actually do that. Okay, that's right. Because I have an account, but I never tried to check it without logging in. So
yeah, this brings up a philosophical question about metrics of success. So one of the requirements that was put on us is that to track downloads. So we have actually put in a fair amount of effort to have a seamless transition from browsing to downloading and making you log in. So the question is, how do you encourage people to log in even if they're not downloading so you can track more information? So part of the motivation for doing personalization is to give kind of a value proposition for doing that. But one of the things that's come up is that there's value to the data that is beyond download that we need to track as well. So for example, it's tipping a little bit now, but historically the facial norms mini site was the most heavily visited part of the FaceSpace website, which doesn't involve any downloads at all. Now, actually what we're seeing, I'll show you the analytics shortly, is we're seeing more people go to the data than the facial norms site. But there's a bunch of information for which, just looking at it is useful. So we definitely want to get into tracking those views, or when people are mousing over stuff as being use of the data that we could characterize as providing value. And then at that point, how do we encourage them to log in so we actually know more about who it is that put the mouse over this particular picture, or did a print of that screen. So that's kind of, it's a standard. It's not a FaceSpace problem, it's just a standard web marketing problem, right? So we're trying to apply some of the best practice as to how do you get people to log in, right? Because that's the gold standard, getting somebody to create an account and log in. That's the gold standard for collecting information. Right, and that's the tension, right? Ease of use versus getting them to log in. And then how do you encourage them to log in and not make that be a pain in the neck?
Yeah. So on the topic of download, so with the new web interface, it's really easy to find data and to find individual data sets. But I've noticed doing bulk downloads is quite difficult. So have you had any ideas on maybe having some sort of shopping cart feature where you can add data sets, or having bulk download feature?
Yeah, we've actually done quite a bit of work in a different BD2K project in how to create on-the-fly aggregate data sets. And the plan is over the next couple of months to integrate that into this. So it won't be just the zip file download. It'll be assembled data set, kind of shopping cart-like, although I don't like calling it a shopping cart. But it'll be like that. So the idea is to on the fly create derived data sets and then to be able to download those derived data sets. And there's a bunch of really cool stuff we've done that hopefully you'll find quite nice around that. But yes, that's definitely on the track for this year. Melissa.
So just really quickly, I think, it's always a challenge to get people to log in to be able to track them, right? So one of the things is just messaging around what are they going to get for their login, right? So it's more than just downloading data. Maybe there's personalized searches. Maybe there's, what sort of bells. I mean, you guys have probably all discussed this already, but I just wanted to point that out because incentivizing people to log in is really what you have to do. So.
Right. So that's the idea. As I had mentioned, the value proposition for logging in. So personalization, dashboards, maybe you get to do blog postings, who knows, right? But you need to incentivize people to log in because, even in the commercial world, this is not, as I said, this is not a face-based problem. Getting value proposition for people to create accounts and then log in when they visit a site is a challenge for everyone. And I think, we've got some familiarity with what happens in the commercial sector. And what we want to do is kind of take best practice and apply that here so we can encourage people to log in so we can sell them data.
Yeah, so one of the reasons we're having this big discussion is from the programmatic point of view. When my institute director says, so Steve, what's going on FaceSpace? It's nice for me to be able to say that so many people have downloaded data. These are all academics. These aren't people just looking for files, right? Then it helps me look at what's come from FaceSpace. And it creates the argument for FaceSpace 3 if there's ever going to be a FaceSpace 3. I can't just say, well, a bunch of people went to the site. That's nice. I have to be able to make some quantitative argument.
So actually, and then we can get off this subject. I mean, something for people to think about are what are incentives that we could provide who you think the users are that would encourage them to log in. So I was only half joking about blog postings. I mean, one of the things we spent a lot of time, and actually this is important, we have now added what's called fine-grained access control. So we can allow you to, we can control very carefully who gets to do what. So, I mean, what if you had, for example, data quality metrics that people might want to, or comments about how they use the data, or the ability to do markup or annotation on pieces of data? Are those things that you think your users would do, and could we come up with a set of features that would be attractive? Melissa's dying to say something.
One more point might be, we in other circumstances were able to get really good participation from users that were contributing to the resource. So people are contributing data. So, it's not just the people in the room, but maybe somebody else out in the community that has data that they want to add to or contribute, but including people in the room. Incentivizing their participation by creating these gray literature publications that actually document the work that was done and letting them talk about that, and then them being able to reference those in CVs and biosketches and grant reports and things like that. So that might be one way. And we went from 0% participation to 100% from the people that we asked to do this, just simply by creating those gray literature publications.
Right. I think that's a good point. And so I think we should be thinking creatively about how to engage and get participation from the broader community. And the reason why all this kind of boring IT stuff is important is we've got all the structure in place where we could actually do this very easily right now. So the question is to decide what's the right thing to do, and then we can do it in a very nice controlled way that will be scalable and work quite well. So now it's really a question of, how do we want to engage? What's the value proposition? What's the metrics for success? How are we going to push the science forward? I'll stop talking in commercial business terms, right? So what are the important scientific things that we want to do, and how do we motivate the community to participate in that? So I think we're in a position now where we can empower all that kind of activity to take place. And if we figure out what we want it is to be, then we can do it. Hurrah. 15 minutes. We're doing well. Okay, so that's that. Let's see, usability enhancements. Well, we're almost done here, right? As I've said this repeatedly, I'll just say it again. We've been really working very hard to engage you and engage the community and produce something that is intuitive and usable and makes sense, and not too hard, not too clunky, and allow you to get to the answers you want rapidly, to support power users. People know what they want. People don't know what they want. So a lot of work with that. So usability testing, Chris has done a lot of work with that. Beta testing cycles, which, again, many of you participated in. We've done a lot of work from the first rollout of the whole filtering interface to try to streamline that, make that more obvious and accessible. We've added a new site tour, so there's some self-training that we've put in place, and that's pretty cool. That came in the last month or so. And surveys say people seem to like what we're doing. Is that true? We have surveys and people like it? So just a couple of metrics we put in place, again, kind of industry standard stuff around Google Analytics. So we're tracking. So what we don't have now, which is on the table, is we don't kind of have the detailed nitty-gritty of when people go into the data browser, what do they do, how many filters. Actually, we have that information. We haven't kind of mined it yet. Ultimately, we'd like to know what people are searching for, the order they're searching for things, how many filters they use, do they mostly add or do they take them away, or, so get a little more insight into the interaction through the data. We're not quite there yet. But we do have a couple of statistics, again, using kind of the standard Google Analytics. I would say, so Chris will probably kick me here, but we do have a Google Analytics site. If anyone actually cares about it, I think we could make the analytics site available to you if you're actually interested in this stuff. Steve can see that, and that's self-serving on my part, because now when Steve says, can you give me a report about who downloaded what, I can say, well, go make your own report.
But seriously, if you are interested in that you can email me or help@FaceBase.org. And
I don't think there's anything secret here, so we can make that available. So what do we know? This was since July 1, 2015. We have 200 new registered users, 300 downloads, 34,000 unique page views, 3 pages a session. So we have a pretty good, I think this number is actually not too terrible. We have what's called a bounce rate of 45%, which is people who kind of come in and they say, oops, I wanted Facebook, not FacePage, and they go someplace else. So it turns out 45% is actually pretty standard. So people who show up then actually do something else in the site, at least click one more page. So that's not bad. The data browser has been accessed over 4,000 times. I'm actually kind of pleased about that. So we see that at least 50% of the users, was it 50%? I think something like 50% of the users who went to the site actually went and looked at the data browser. Now, whether they did anything useful or not with it, we don't know, but at least they're looking at it. And then, this other point, which is our downloads, we're not looking at people getting useful stuff out of the pictures. So we want to definitely, or the details pages. Yeah, so we need to get more insight as to people who are actually looking at the kind of the high-level summaries of the data that we're providing, have gotten something useful from that, but didn't actually download a data set. I think we should count them somehow as doing something useful. So we need to think about the metrics for that. So we're going to do a lot more work, I think, around the analytics and metrics. I mean, again, we're going to be somewhat commercial in our approach here, which is really we want to drive users to the site, and we want to drive use to the site, and we want to have people come in there, and we want to, what's it called in the business? Conversions, right? We want them to, come in the site and drive to a download or drive to something that we can monetize. So that's going to be a big focus. We've got all the pieces in place, and we're starting to learn some things.
And just a side note about why we don't have all that information within the data browser is that it's within its own like JavaScript, a special flavor of JavaScript kind of bubble that requires its own background configuring in order to like read the stuff that's going on there, and that's what we're actively working on right now. Yeah,
so we should have statistics on. We should have better analytics on what people are actually doing within the data set and how they're cruising around the data set. So we should have that. soon, I hope. I think that's really the critical next step. Let's see. The last thing we did, actually, we premiered the Gordon conference. We now have an interactive tutorial on the website. So for intuitiveness and usability, we spent a lot of time trying to make sure it was obvious what to do. But also, and we've done things like add tooltips and, mouse overs. So you get a lot more kind of interactive feedback of, what you're supposed to do. And then for people who want it, we now have an interactive tutorial, which will guide you through and show you all of the features. And then let's see if this works. And we've also, in kind of marketing, we have also created a YouTube video. And this is hopefully the first of many. So this basically now, and there's not a narration on this yet, but this uses actually the site tour feature. And walks you through a particular use case scenario that we developed to show what the FaceBase site was good for at the Gordon conference. And part of the exercise for tomorrow is we'd like to come up with more of these examples. And then we'll make more videos of these examples. So yeah, this just gives you an idea of how you would use FaceBase and the features of the FaceBase website to interact through the data to answer a scientific question. And these are reasonably, it's easy for me to say because I didn't do it, but these are not too hard to produce. So these weren't too hard to produce, right? No, right. So if we have ideas for other videos that people think would be useful, we would be happy to talk to you and produce additional videos. So that's it. I think that pretty much that's the end of the slides, right?
So this tutorial is really nice, but if at least the homepage keeps going through different iterations, you're going to have to keep making new beginnings to your video. But what I'm concerned about is that you're training people to use FaceBase with a certain model, and then you're essentially, to use a phrase, moving the cheese, right? Your parts are shifting around. You're changing the way you get into things. So people will have to continually retrain themselves.
So that's been a concern of mine. But like this iteration that we showed you that we're working on, I am really trying to make that the last template. I'm trying to make it so that then that can be flexible and we can just it should be dynamic to a certain extent. As we have new offerings, we should be able to focus on them. And I'm just trying to settle on a good way to expand as we expand. But yeah, I don't want it to be a shifting landscape all the time at all. Any other questions? Yeah.
So when there is a new feature or a new data set that's being uploaded to the website, do we have a way of telling everyone something's new added? Is it to subscribers or to broader than that?
We have a couple of mailing lists. So there's a list that goes out to the users who are registered. It's like a system status update. So when there are important changes that are useful to the users, we send it out to there. We also have a public mailing list that people outside subscribe to. And then we have our internal lists as well. So we try to broadcast new information. Like when we have the new zebrafish stuff up and running. In December, we had our big wave of new data, and we sent it out on those things. We also do a blog post or a news item on the website itself. So we try to publicize as much as possible.
I don't know if you're already doing this, but maybe to increase the traffic, people who use the data, if they use it in a publication,
so
maybe you can offer.
Thanking you guys for inviting us.
Sorry, hold on.
This is in code. We don't care about in code, do we?
No, maybe you can post their articles and promise to send it to all of the people who've registered on the database, like saying your article will be highlighted if you're using our data. to the community. That might be a way to incentivize people to want to use the data, acknowledge, FaceBase and things like that.
Yeah, I think there's kind of two or three ideas there, all of which I think we're pursuing maybe partially, and maybe we should, as the kind of collectively revisit, right? So there's the idea of maintaining a bibliography of publications that cited FaceBase data. That's good for Steve and good for us. Right. So I don't know how aggressively we're doing this now, or whether we're doing it retrospectively by going through the PubMed. Yeah, so keeping that up to date and incentivizing people to cite FaceBase data, and I'm going to come back to that in just a moment. And then we do have a featured publications section on the website that was on the top, and the new layout that's going to the bottom. I mean, if people were providing us with the pointers and a pretty picture, I don't see any problem with featuring other publications on the FaceBase website. Mm-hmm. And then the third point, this is a little more inside baseball, but one of the other things we're going to be doing this year is much better job of kind of standard, Melissa will like this, standard practice data citation. So we're coming up with a strategy for standardizing metadata and permanent identifiers. So now we have citable data sets. So now you'll be able to cite specific FaceBase data collections or subsets by essentially using the right mechanisms that allow you to do proper data citation. And so that'll be good too. So that all feeds into this shopping cart strategy, is how to fold proper data citation into the shopping cart.
So I have one more point, is that when somebody goes on to use the website, do you ask the question, what are they using this for? I mean, potentially for a grant application, the data, or potentially for publication, or for educational purposes, like a image there would be great to put in their lecture. It might be interesting to know why people what they're going to do with it, and then you could adjust your database accordingly.
I think we collect some of that information when they originally sign up. We do collect a little supplemental information. I think there's another path, which is to go back and do user surveys, and then, which is probably a slightly better way of doing things. And then we just need to be careful about all the things we know about surveys and not annoying people with too many of them, and kind of doing the right methodology there. But I think this kind of, in general, thinking about how to go back and quantify the utility of the data is going to be important over the next year. Then I'll stop. Things to look forward coming up. High resolution data model. We are using. Right now, we're still using kind of the simple data set oriented model, but actually in the background, we've got a much more detailed model based on something called the ISA, Investigation Study Assay Model, which is a widely used model for collecting information about experiments. So that'll give you better ways of doing cross-linking of data and resolution into the searches. We have on the short list, we've been pushing very hard on doing gene expression data, so we can at least look at differential gene expression. Yang's got a bunch of new data for which we have that. We're interested in going back and retrospectively kind of recurating some of the older gene expression data and adding heat maps and scatter plots, so that's kind of in the short term. More cross-cutting integrations, this linkage across different types of data so that we can start to pull the threads together from multiple spokes into more comprehensive views based on different perspectives. More data matrices. These look, as I had mentioned, that the existing one we did, I think, was very successful. Now we've got a general framework for being able to take arbitrary dimensions that make sense and display them in these matrix presentations. So expect to see more of those kind of interactive matrices like we have for the anatomical features and age developmental stages. And then we have integration with the Monarch PhenoGrid, which you're going to hear more about. So we're going to really attempt to contextualize the FaceBase data in a larger external larger data collections and data sets, which again, we hope will drive traffic to the FaceBase site and increase the utility of the FaceBase data by contextualizing it in other data collections as well. So those are kind of the big things coming up, and then all the normal stuff you would expect us to be doing. Okay, I guess that I've consumed all my time.
You are done.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so Shannon Fisher and Matt Harris will be up next. I'm just going to grab